Hello, my name is Kevin Bugin. I'm the Acting Deputy Director of Operations for the Office of New Drugs and the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at the US FDA. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the OND reorganization that began in 2019 and completed in March of 2020, and the New Drugs Regulatory Program Modernization, of which the OND reorganization was a spin-off out of. Of course, let me thank the organizers of the FDA Small Business Regulatory Education for Industry or READY workshop. I think this is a really great format and a really great program, and I'm glad that they update it every year with the latest and greatest, which will include this presentation. So, not to get into it now, but just to let you know, the modernization of the New Drugs Regulatory Program was guided by 6 strategic objectives. These were our DNA of modernizing the New Drugs Program, and they included scientific leadership, focusing on integrated assessments, our ideas or our approaches to benefit risk monitoring, how we manage talent, our operational excellence, and how we manage knowledge. I'll come back later to these strategic objectives and also hopefully set the stage for why we thought these objectives would be important for our modernization initiative, which has really been a very long-term continuous journey that began about 4 years ago and is ongoing to date. Throughout this presentation, I'll hopefully have given you a nice review of the impetus or the influences and causes or forces that were driving the modernization of the New Drugs Regulatory Program, including the OND reorganization. I will have reviewed the modernization objectives, which I just mentioned, but in more detail. I'll then, of course, go through the structure of our now reorganized Office of New Drugs. And lastly, share some updates on ongoing New Drugs Regulatory Program modernization initiatives. So let's begin with the impetus for the New Drugs Regulatory Program modernization and the OND reorganization, of which they both went hand in glove. Now, CDER's mission is to protect and promote public health by helping to ensure that human drugs are safe and effective for their intended use, and that they meet established quality standards and are available to patients. OND's mission in securing that CDER mission is to maintain and advance our global leadership in ensuring that safe and effective drugs and biologics are available to the American people. And with the modernization, what we hope to do is advance that leadership in the science and regulation of new drugs. Now, why do we need to consider this? Well, the Office of New Drugs really has this standing and reputation that's shared, that the global view is that OND is the leader and sets the standards for regulatory management of drug development and review. Why is this the case? What makes OND the global leader? Our independence, rigorous focus on evidence, science, and not on external pressures, which I hopefully came through over the course of this past year. And then the outstanding scientific and regulatory expertise of our staff. Our experience in doing our regulatory work, evaluating and applying our learnings from past programs and current programs so that we really drive the whole field forward. And of course, our interdisciplinary approach, really leveraging the expertise across disciplines and divisions and offices and centers, realizing that the complexity of the work we do is not addressable by a single discipline alone, but through our teams of multiple disciplines and experts. The great leadership that exists within our divisions and our offices. And lastly, the mission-driven culture of our organization, both in CDER and in OND, the deeply held view that we are the front line in protecting and improving the health of the American public. I cannot say how proud and impressed I am of our organization over this past year and their willingness and ability to sort of meet the challenge that was in front of them to help us get out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So what's changing in the landscape? Why did we need to undergo a modernization? Well, there's rapidly evolving science. The knowledge of genetics and genomics applied to discovery is changing rapidly. Increasing identification of molecular defects and drivers is changing disease definitions. These are all new areas of focus. There's also an increased number of programs for rare diseases, different disease subtypes, late resistant disease that we're now slicing and dicing, and overall a decreasing number of programs that are broad-based therapies for chronic common diseases. A lot of this is driven by science, but also by the marketplace. And then, of course, there's new drug platforms, increase in cell-based gene-directed therapies, siRNAs, ASOs, bispecifics, ADCs, and others, really making previously undruggable targets druggable finally. A changing clinical trial enterprise, especially if you look over the past year, more use of decentralized trial practices, greater remote monitoring, greater use of master protocols, which allows us to test multiple agents through the same common protocol, and which brings many benefits. Adaptive designs, Bayesian designs and analyses, externally controlled studies in small population diseases, all really changing the way we run and evaluate therapeutics in clinical trials. And of course, advances in bioinformatics. The analytical tools that we need to use or are used in drug development are changing rapidly. More AI and machine learning, management of huge databases is now being brought to bear. Standardization of data structures across organizations is bringing additional data elements available to us to use. To continue, advances in developing massive clinical health databases, as I mentioned, and networks, and the push to increase the use of real-world data and real-world evidence, and even an increased focus on pragmatic trials or trials that we can run in the very real-world setting. Increased sophistication of digital health tools or digital devices and how these can be used as rigorous endpoints in our clinical trials. Rising expectations for larger patient role in the decision-making and increased patient-relevant information in our labels. In other words, patient-focused drug development. Expectation that FDA will address all public health emergencies. And before COVID, we had opioids, and before that, I'm sure there are so many, and that FDA should really be doing something at the forefront. Expecting OND to address rising drug costs through a focus on access. So how do we intend to respond to these challenges? Well, we have to assure our organization can respond to all of these challenges and any more that may come. So evolving science, changing the focus on drug development, new platforms and new data sources, changing demands and the expectations from our stakeholders, especially patients, but also industry, academics, and Congress. In essence, in order to maintain and continue that rigorous, independent, evidence-based, mission-driven approach that I mentioned that makes us really that highly reputable, high-standing global standard, it's fundamental to our success. And so preparing for and appropriately responding to this changing drug development and regulatory environment is an absolute must. So enter the New Drugs Regulatory Program and, of course, OND. So the New Drugs Regulatory Program modernization, again, as I mentioned, started about 2 or 3 years ago, encompasses all the disciplines involved in new drug review. So you have the Office of New Drugs, you have colleagues from the Office of Translational Sciences, so the Office of Clinical Pharmacology, Office of Biostatistics. You also have the Office of Surveillance and Epidemiology, and then, of course, the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. But OND is really at the center of the New Drugs Regulatory Program. It's going to be pulling in and driving each one of the drug development programs and marketing applications that it receives. Now, the NDRP modernization launched many work streams, and some of them have already begun to implement and impact how OND works. And there are several more that are on the horizon that will continue to do this. There are changes from our organization with the restructuring, which I'll talk through today, standing up a number of new offices and infrastructure. And then there's also changes to our work processes and some of our roles. So now I want to kind of quickly go through those NDRP modernization objectives. So as I said earlier, there are 6 objectives, and these are really the guiding principles for the modernizing of the New Drugs Regulatory Program. These were our North Stars. So scientific leadership, we really wanted to grow the scientific expertise within our organization and use that expertise to truly clarify pathways to regulatory approval, really fostering drug development in spaces where maybe we were unsure or drug developers were unsure how to move forward. We can bring our expertise to bear and help bring in development to that space, truly expanding the armamentarium to address unmet medical needs. And towards that end, we hope to proactively collaborate with academic medical scientists, patient disease advocates, really evaluate scientific gaps proactively and strategically foster drug development. Now, looking internally, but then also how we engage externally as well, we really wanted to focus on working in a much more integrated fashion and also focus on conducting an assessment And so we will critically and collaboratively assess information in our submissions so that they are meeting the statutory and regulatory requirements, and doing it in a way that really fosters collaboration and also focuses on what each discipline can bring to bear, rather than having each individual discipline sort of work in silos and duplicate efforts, duplicate documentation, etc. We also need to focus on maintaining that our assessments are rigorous and risk-based and clinically relevant, and really hone in on key issues that are going to affect the benefit and risk determinations of those applications. But of course, incorporate the patient perspective. As we move through to post-market settings and products become approved, we need to ensure that we've established a unified post-market safety surveillance framework so that we can effectively protect the American public on a continuous basis and systematically monitor the benefits and risks of approved drugs across their life cycles. We are an organization that relies on our people. We are not a car manufacturer. We don't have large facilities with large automated manufacturing lines and machines. We have people, and we need to make sure we're managing those people as best as possible, attracting the best, developing them so that they can be even better, and then retaining those outstanding people. And in this space, our focus is really on leveraging the 21st Century Cures Act authorities to help recruit and retain technical, scientific, and professional experts, and really work through the backlog of vacant positions that we've had over the years. And we've made tremendous progress in this area. Of course, an organization of people needs a lot of process and a lot of strong operations. We essentially want to make sure our scientists can focus on the science. And so operational excellence is a dedicated focus for us, really enhancing our ability to address the large volume of workload through greater process standardization and better defined roles and responsibilities, but also really using that efficiency to enable our scientists so that they can focus on science, as I mentioned, and not ancillary tasks. We'll also facilitate knowledge management and ensure that all of the information that is either submitted to us or generated by us throughout our review in the New Drugs Regulatory Program, that we capture it and that we can use it and make it easier for our staff to find as they're going through and doing their scientific work, so that they can always be building and leveraging the best possible information and regulatory precedents. This will ultimately reduce manual work time and increase the speed and efficiency of the submission assessment process and consistency and predictability of our decision making. Now, the reorganization of the Office of New Drugs and the other offices that sort of align to the Office of New Drugs really focuses on our scientific leadership objectives, managing talent, and operational excellence. So you'll see here the creation of therapeutically focused divisions is intended to help us align with the products we regulate and create these cross-divisional interactions that bring together offices in disease clusters based on the evolving science, drug discovery, and development. And then in the talent space, we've really enhanced our career paths within the non-clinical divisions and the regulatory, such as the regulatory operations, the administrative operations, and our pharm tox functions. And then we have new roles that modernize and strengthen our work. And of course, a commitment from the organization to really strengthening overall program operations and the science behind how we do our drug evaluation. And then lastly, there's a greater balance of leadership span of control, and also our regulatory operations and pharm tox organizations are organized into their own divisions that maintain alignment with the clinical structure, but essentially allows them to really focus on building and specializing within those disciplines. Now I'm quickly going to go through the structure of the reorganized Office of New Drugs. So as I mentioned, this reorganization began in about mid-2019 and finished in 2020. I'll give a quick kudos or shout out to the special program staff of the Office of New Drugs that really orchestrated a very seamless transition and working with all the parts of the center and the agency to ensure reorganization could go through without us dropping any major balls. And the final and the largest phase, as I said, was completed in March 2020, which, as many will recall, this was around the time that we all started to go into a federally mandated lockdown, and a very virtual form of work started for us. And this did create some challenges. I mean, number one, we had many new divisional and office leaders being selected, and a lot of those leaders had a hard time meeting with their organizations face to face, but we did pick up and learn the virtual skills, as many of us did. But it's been a challenging situation with those limited social interactions. However, we have been learning, as all of us have, that there's a good way or great ways to maintain some of those social interactions in the virtual means. So to quickly walk through the structure post-reorg, first of all, what you'll notice is the Office of New Drugs' immediate office is much smaller. We went from something that had several, I think maybe 12 different staffs and associate directors doing different parts of cross-functional activities that enabled work within the Office of New Drugs and also managing outwardly to other programs and initiatives across the center or externally. And the challenge is there seemed to be a bit of a disconnect at times. And so what you'll see in the new structure is a much more agile or nimble Office of New Drugs immediate office, where we simply have our Deputy Director of Clinical that's overseeing the Office of Drug Evaluation Sciences. We have the Deputy Director for Safety that's overseeing the SBRT, which is our safety programs and initiatives, and then a Deputy Director of Operations that's overseeing the Office of Program Operations, the Office of Administrative Operations, and the Office of Regulatory Operations. The Office of New Drug Policy and the Office of Therapeutic, Biologics, and Biosimilars is reporting into the Office of New Drugs Director. So to walk through those additional offices that have been created as sort of an infrastructure of OND, we have the Office of Drug Evaluation Sciences. This is going to house the functions that are involved in the clinical outcomes assessment, so patient-reported outcomes. And then we have the Biomedical Informatics, Biomarker Qualification and Research Division, which will be managing biomarker qualifications, our research programs, and our informatics programs. And of course, we have our 8 clinical offices that's reporting up to our Deputy Director for Clinical. I will come back and discuss those 8 clinical offices in just a moment. Next, there's the Office of New Drug Policy, which will have 2 divisions, a clinical policy division and a regulatory policy division. And the intent of this Office of New Drug Policy was to really enable the rest of the Office of New Drugs infrastructure to work through issues, identify them, elevate them to the Office of New Drug Policy, have an advocate to escalate or elevate those further to the center's policy arms and branches to get quick feedback resolution and ensure we are always moving forward with our best policy and best precedents as possible. Then, of course, the Office of Therapeutic, Biologics, and Biosimilars, as the name would imply, is involved in the review or assessment of therapeutic, biologics, and biosimilars, and has 2 staffs for scientific review and policy. A lot of the review work or the assessment efforts of biosimilars will occur throughout the rest of the clinical organization or other scientific parts of the Office of New Drugs organization, with that coordination feature through that Office of Therapeutic, Biologics, and Biosimilars. Next, we have the Special Program Staff, which is a little bit in the IO, but I'll consider it in infrastructure for OND as well. Special Programs is really there to enable the improvements of the organization in spaces where we may not have congressional or regulatory mandates to do so. So things like the New Drugs Regulatory Program Modernization and reorganizations are all examples of activities that the Special Program Staff will enable. Finally, we move into operations. So the Office of Program Operations, which will include an executive operations staff like an executive secretariat, which helps organize the executives of the Office of New Drugs and handle all of our communications internally and externally. A business process operations staff, which is intended to enable the documentation and streamlining of our business processes. A program development, implementation, and management staff, which is there to support the development and implementation and management of new PDUFA mandated programs, or in other words, prescription drug user fee programs, and other institutionalized programs that the Office of New Drugs may have. And of course, our learning and talent development staff, which is involved in the training and professional development of all of our staff within OND. Next, the Office of Administrative Operations, which includes a financial services staff, which is going to be there for our budget formulation and execution needs, and then an administrative analysis staff to help us forecast and plan forward. And finally, administrative operations staffs, which then cross-functionally support the organization for all their administrative needs. Last but not least, we have our Office of Regulatory Operations, which includes 8 divisions of regulatory operations, which are each aligned to a clinical office, as I'll show in just a minute. So here we can see The next level down, the reorganized clinical, regulatory operations, and pharmacology toxicology structure. As I mentioned earlier, there is an Office of Regulatory Operations with 8 divisions of regulatory operations that are aligned to 8 clinical offices, which you see on the front here at the top: our Office of Infectious Diseases, our Office of Oncologic Diseases, the Office of Non-Prescription Drugs, the Office of Neuroscience, Office of Cardiology, Hematology, Endocrinology, and Nephrology, the Office of Immunology and Inflammation, the Office of Rare Diseases, Pediatrics, Urologic, and Reproductive Medicine, and the Office of Specialty Medicine. So for each one of those offices, you can imagine a division of regulatory operations for infectious disease or oncologic diseases or non-prescription drugs. You get the idea. That is behind the scenes, really supporting them, working collaboratively with the clinical staff and the pharmacology toxicology staff to drive the new drug review programs forward. Now, within these 8 clinical offices, there are 27 clinical divisions and 6 pharm tox divisions. We ideally would have had 8 pharm tox divisions, but at the time of the reorganization, the workload and the allocation of resources quite simply just didn't justify the need for a separate division of pharmacology toxicology based on the rules and standards for how the government is organized within 2 of the clinical offices. And so there are sort of arrangements in that situation where there's not a division of pharm tox, so that pharm tox staff either exist within the immediate office of the clinical office or they're leveraged in partnership with another clinical office. Now quickly, I'll walk through the divisions within this reorganized structure. So within the Office of Infectious Diseases, we have the Division of Anti-Infectives and the Division of Antivirals. So a little bit of antimicrobials, antibacterials in that anti-infectives division, and then our antivirals, such as products to treat coronavirus, in the Division of Antivirals. And then you would see the Division of Pharm Tox that is aligned to infectious disease. Oncologic diseases, we have the Division of Oncology 1, 2, and 3. We have separated into different types of tumors or different types of products, but for the most part, they're all reviewing oncology products. And then we have the Division of Hematologic Malignancies, a slight variation on the oncology products. We have the Division of Hematologic Malignancies 1 and the Division of Hematologic Malignancies 2. And then, of course, you'll see a aligned division of hematology and oncology toxicology. In the Office of Non-Prescription Drugs, we have 2 clinical divisions of non-prescription drugs. And you'll notice we do not have a division of pharmacology toxicology. And in this case, that staff live within the immediate office of this clinical office. Moving on to the Office of Neuroscience, we have the Division of Neurology 1 and the Division of Neurology 2, then the Division of Psychiatry, and lastly, the Division of Anesthesiology, Addiction Medicine, and Pain Medicine. Here we also have an aligned division of Pharm Tox for neuroscience. Next, we have the Office of Cardiology, Hematology, Endocrinology, and Nephrology, or OCHEN. And inside this office, we have the Division of Cardiology and Nephrology, the Division of Non-Malignant Hematology, the Division of Diabetes, Lipid Disorders, and Obesity, and the Division of General Endocrinology. We have an aligned division of Pharm Tox for cardiology, hematology, endocrinology, and nephrology as well. Next is the Office of Immunology and Inflammation, and within you can see the Division of Rheumatology and Transplant Medicine, the Division of Pulmonology, Allergy, and Critical Care, the Division of Gastroenterology, the Division of Hepatology and Nutrition, and the Division of Dermatology and Dentistry. I will note that the Division of Rheumatology and Transplant Medicine and the Division of Pulmonary, Allergy, and Critical Care are essentially a split from the prior Division of Pulmonology, Allergy, or DPART, and the Division of Gastroenterology and the Division of Hepatology and Nutrition is a split from the prior Division of Gastroenterology and Inborn Errors of Metabolism, with the Inborn Errors of Metabolism moving to the Division of Rare Diseases and Medical Genetics in the next office that I'll be describing. Also, we have an aligned division of Pharm Tox for the Immunology and Inflammation Clinical Office. So next we have the Office of Rare Diseases, Pediatrics, Urologic, and Reproductive Medicines, which includes the Division of Pediatrics and Maternal Health, and the Division of Rare Diseases and Medical Genetics, which I described earlier, includes that Inborn Errors of Metabolisms, therapeutic areas from the prior DGIEP, but also includes the Rare Diseases team for the Office of New Drugs. And of course, we have the Division of Urology, Obstetrics, and Gynecology, and an aligned division of Pharm Tox for this clinical office. Lastly, we have the Office of Specialty Medicine, which includes our Division of Ophthalmology and our Division of Medical Imaging and Radiation Medicine. Now, the Division of Ophthalmology was also a split off from the Division of Transplant and Ophthalmic Products that existed before. And so here you'll see ophthalmology as its own separate division. And in this office, we have a shared Pharm Tox support coming from the Office of Rare Diseases, Pediatric, Urologic, Reproductive Medicine. So a quick knowledge check here. FDA's OND reorganization was intended to create more specialized and therapeutically aligned structures. True or false? That's right. It's true. Now I'm going to discuss very briefly some updates on ongoing new drugs regulatory program modernization initiatives. First of all, the integrated assessment of marketing applications. So prior to the implementation of this new approach to how we assess the benefits and risks of our marketing applications to support either their approval or a complete response action, the approaches to the reviews tended to be siloed. So disciplines would have worked independently. In many cases, this led to redundant work. Reviews also centered around those disciplines rather than around review issues. So essentially, each individual discipline did a full workup of everything within that marketing application, soup to nuts, end to end, and review issues were scattered throughout. And review issues, we mean any issue that would have affected the benefits and risks associated with the product. And as a result, the review issues were sometimes not discussed thoroughly and not really tracked as early as possible. In addition, signatories were not involved early enough. There was insufficient time for critical thinking. RPMs may not have been optimally utilized as the regulatory experts that they are, and may not have been considered as integral to the review team as they should have been. And lastly, many experts are involved in the assessments of a new drug product marketing application. And in the past, these individuals would have been consulted to the team. And in those situations, those experts may not have really felt like they were part of the review team. And as such, we didn't get the true benefits from their collaboration. And what we're moving to is the integrated assessment, which really focuses on a much more collaborative, interdisciplinary, and issue-based approach to how we conduct the review of marketing applications and also how we document the review of marketing applications. So there's a new process that includes benefit risk scoping of the application. Early in the process of the review involves the signatories, the entire team is there. And then as issues are identified, there are joint assessment meetings throughout the review cycle to address those issues. And then there's an integrated review template that ensures we take an issue-focused approach to documenting our assessment of all the review issues, and all the necessary requirements are met for a rigorous evaluation of the benefits and risks of those marketing applications. This program is in implementation, but it's very close to completing implementation for new molecular entity NDAs and original biologics and efficacy supplements across all of the Office of New Drugs by the end of this year. Next, we have the IND Review Management, and here we identified challenges for 30-day safety and protocol and amendment reviews, including variable practices, meaning timelines and meetings and level of documentation across our divisions, inconsistent and redundant documentation. In some cases, we had summaries from clinical and non-clinical Pharm Tox findings, or we had more than one discipline summarizing a protocol. Unclear expectations regarding our timelines, when we should share potential hold issues to sponsors, when we should even share them with our teams, and when to complete our primary reviews. And in some cases, sponsors may not have received comments in time to actually influence study design. We know drug development is moving at a fast pace because we all want to help patients. And so if FDA is not able to review and at least let sponsors know that it's conducting its review in a timely fashion, that may result in feedback from the FDA that's not actionable by the time it's received. The IND workstream is creating templates that are similarly issue-based, like the integrated assessment of marketing applications, and also foster that interdisciplinary collaboration that is that strategic objective of the modernization, hopefully reducing redundancy and low-value work and enabling better knowledge management. We are also creating procedures that standardize the review process, clearly define roles and responsibilities, and improve our ability to provide high-quality feedback to sponsors in a timely manner. And the approach to categorizing incoming protocols and amendments will hopefully help us identify those protocols that should be triaged and moved into a high-priority process so that we can communicate early with sponsors. Ultimately, our goal is to more effectively identify and influence protocols and drug development designs so we can have a significant impact on public health and do so in the most scientifically rigorous and efficient way possible. In post-market safety, addressing our benefit risk monitoring scientific objective, while CDER has a demonstrated track record of excellence and innovation in post-marketing safety for decades now, we're really excited to be building on that legacy and also address the evolving nature of post-market safety. So we're establishing multidisciplinary drug safety teams that are accountable for the safety of a portfolio of drugs rather than having individual programs within individual review divisions sort of trying to play whack-a-mole essentially to address the post-market safety issues. These teams will proactively design safety strategies for individual drugs and also portfolios as a whole. This will hopefully make it easier for our staff to use their time well and to know where to get help when there's a disconnect or a miscommunication across offices, because it really takes a village or it takes a team. Advisory committees, an area of great interest as of late. Here, while we know a well-planned and a well-conducted advisory committee meeting is an incredibly important tool to a new drug review process, AC meetings have their challenges. They're very burdensome to plan. The roles and responsibilities of who is doing what with regards to our review program versus our center and agency staff or our special government employees can be unclear. And it's just hard to find experts and even harder to clear them. So we've established a work stream in the modernization to help establish or develop clear policies for when an AC might be appropriate so that we really focus our time and effort on where it will have the most value. Develop approaches to enhance our recruitment and retention of outstanding advisory committee experts, and create a toolkit with useful, easily accessible information that helps clarify roles and responsibilities throughout the planning process. We also are looking at future projects to include a streamlined briefing document, tools to support the screening and identification of experts, and additional resources to help staff prepare for their presentations and their discussions on the day of. Next, we have the Nexus for New Drug Review, which is an IT development program, really looking at the existing IT systems, which may not be able to support new drug review as it is and as it continues to evolve, and capitalize on the greater electronic data and information and workflows that CDER is working to implement all across the modernization and put it into one single platform or IT system. This will really enable the new drugs program to continue to modernize its operations and by more easily implementing new PDUFA mandates or other new programs and adapt to changes in the new drug review landscape. CDER's new drug review programs also will get to benefit from cross-office or common intra-center processes, documentation, records, workflows, and informatics, rather than sort of the development of IT individually for one process or one program at a time. We'll be able to look across the platform and use that consistency to make those individual workflows and processes benefit from the greater good. Ultimately getting to a better use of data, better automation in our work, greater flexibility, better access to new tools. And lastly, knowledge management, which is the process of effectively gathering, sharing, and utilizing institutional knowledge, as I mentioned earlier. Not only is this a key strategic objective of the new drugs regulatory program modernization, but more than ever before, we need to be able to enable retrieval of our current and past decisions and precedents because of the ever-increasing workload or the ever greater interest and scrutiny on our decisions and the need to make the best possible decisions. As a result, to achieve the strategic objective, we launched a work stream to operationalize and support knowledge management development and data governance across the program, currently prioritizing the enabling of greater consistency of data capture and the integration of knowledge across the program through greater data governance, standardization, structured review templates and workflows that are enabled or enabling our processes and information technology as Nexus is rolling out. Ultimately, we want to create that collaborative knowledge sharing and learning culture that makes any great organization better. A final knowledge check here. As I started out this section, the integrated assessment of marketing applications was intended to shift multidisciplinary review practices to 1, individually driven siloed review approaches, 2, more collaborative interdisciplinary approaches, or 3, combined assessments, but relatively individual. That's right. The answer is 2, more collaborative interdisciplinary approaches. And so in summary, the New Drugs Regulatory Program Modernization and the OND Reorganization were intended to address the evolving nature of drug development. The modernization of the program is guided by 6 strategic objectives. OND's new structure is more functionally and therapeutically aligned and helps us achieve at least 3 of those 6 strategic objectives. And the modernization has several ongoing initiatives. We are not done yet, and we will continue to do our best.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bugin. Thank you so much, Dr. Bugin, for taking time out of your day to answer some questions after your presentation. So, and for all of our audience, if you want to ask a question to this presenter or upcoming presenters, go ahead and type it into the Q&A chat pod, and we will get to as many questions as we have time for. And with that, Dr. Bugin, our first question for you is, I do not understand the difference between the Office of Biologics and Biosimilars and OBP. Could you kindly explain?
Hi, everyone. Absolutely. A great question. So the Office of Biotechnology Products, or OBP, is actually a quality review focused office. So they're going to be looking at the chemistry, manufacturing, and otherwise quality assessments of those products. Whereas the Office of Biologics and Biosimilars within the Office of New Drugs is focused on the clinical assessment or the benefit risk assessment of those new products. Hopefully that answers the question.
That's great. Thank you. Our next question for you. Our questioner appreciates the repeat descriptions of operations across multiple titles and their missions. Could you advise if there are also functions shared or not focused on quality, iterative learning about mistakes and pitfalls, etc.?
Thank you. Another great question. So this is something that's continuing to build within the organization. There is currently some functions of this shared by the Office of Program Operations within the Business Process Operations staff. So they're looking at first documenting what our standard operating procedures would be, the important key performance metrics or outcomes that we would be looking for, and also helping us determine what the good quality of output would be. So content-wise, again, if it's a review document, what does a good review look like, so that we can sort of do the process audits and the content audits to understand how we're performing. So that's that first step around documenting in the process of the operations that we have. There's also a function within the special program staff that's sort of growing out of the original New Drugs Regulatory Program Modernization, but becoming a real institutionalized part of OND, to the comment about iterative learning, to really make OND a learning organization that is trying to do sort of the spot checks or the more random quality assurance type functions to see how something is performing. Or if there was a challenge, they might go in and do some sort of a CAPA or corrective action and preventative assessment type approach to understand what happened there and what could be improved. So those are some of the functions around or focused on the quality of how process and content is running that are beginning to be formed.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Bugin. Do you have time for one more question? Let's see.
Sure, we can do one more.
Okay. So then the last question we have for you is, do the umbrella basket platform trials designs influence any of the OND reorganization, or how do you think the restructure may improve to handle umbrella basket platform trial designs?
Interesting question, and I think also an interesting observation. So, when the reorganization of the Office of New Drugs was being conceived of, I don't think platform trials or this idea that the clinical research ecosystem might shift to using that design, you know, more so than it had been in the design of the reorganization. But it is an interesting observation that now that the organization of OND, at least the clinical components, are more therapeutically aligned, it would make the sort of the oversight and management of platform trials much more feasible because you'd have all the relevant therapeutic area staff sort of housed in similar or close proximity offices and division. So I mean, it's a great question. Unfortunately, the answer is no. It wasn't really part of the process of going into the reorganization's design, but I think certainly now it does help with some of that piece as we move in that direction. So good question, good observation.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bugin, and thank you to our questioner for the last great question and for all of them. And with that, I will pass to Renu Lal to introduce our next speaker.